All right, today we've got a really cool philosophical comeback story for you. It's all about how logic, this super abstract field, almost lost its way, and then had to find its way back to the real world just to make sense again. So let's kick things off with a big question. Is logic just a game? Like chess with a bunch of symbols and rules that don't really mean anything outside the game itself? Or is it fundamentally tied to the world we all live in? Believe it or not, for a long time, some of the smartest people on the planet were really struggling with that one. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with what I'm calling logic's great divorce. Then we'll see the world of pure symbols that came out of it, the huge problem of truth that followed, how reality makes a comeback, and finally, how we're now building logical worlds. Okay, first up, logic's great divorce. How on earth did logic and reality end up growing so far apart? And that brings us to this idea of a world made of pure symbols. This was the dream of a huge intellectual movement called logicism. So, this movement, logicism, had a really radical idea. Imagine trying to create the rules of grammar, but without ever using actual words. That's kind of what they were doing. Guys like Bertrand Russell, they wanted a pure system of rules, one that didn't have to bother with messy, real-world things. And that study of things, what exists, has a name. It's called ontology. Logicism basically wanted to kick ontology to the curb. Their grand plan was to get rid of all the specifics. Forget about this apple or that chair. They wanted to deal only with pure, abstract formulas. The big goal here? To build a kind of master logic, a system that would be true not just here on Earth, but in any possible world you could ever imagine, a truly universal system. But there was a massive price to pay for this quest for purity. In cutting itself off from our world, logic turned into this beautiful, perfect little bubble. It was a self-contained system, technically flawless, but it had absolutely nothing to say about the one world that actually matters to us. The one where we live and breathe and try to figure things out. So what happens when your entire system for figuring out what's true or false decides to ignore reality completely? Well, you run headfirst into a giant problem with the very idea of truth. And this is where the crisis really hit. Logicism got totally obsessed with what we call formal truth. Think of it as just checking if your sentences follow the rules of the game. But in doing that, it completely abandoned substantive truth, which is, the kind of truth we actually care about. The kind that asks, does this statement actually match up with the real world? And look, this wasn't some little academic quibble. One of the founding fathers of modern logic, the great Gottlob Frege, he saw this as the central problem for the entire field. For him, the whole point of logic, its entire reason for existing, was to understand the laws of real truth. And right here, this is the turning point in the whole story. A new school of thought came along and basically said, hold on a second. For any of this to mean anything, we have to open the door and let the real world back into the room. The hero in this part of our story is a movement called intuitionism. And their big argument was actually super simple, but also incredibly powerful. They said, look, how can you even talk about whether something is true or false if you don't have an external world to check it against? It just doesn't make sense. So this is how intuitionism completely flipped the script. They put real, substantive truth back at the center of the conversation. And if you have truth, you need a reality for it to be true about. And that means, you guessed it, logic needs ontology. It needs to be about something that exists. This quote from the logician Arndt Heiting just nails it perfectly. Logic requires ontology for its interpretation. I mean, think about it. Without that connection to reality, all the symbols and rules of logic are just meaningless scribbles on a page. They need a world to give them meaning. So, where are we now? Did logicians just throw out all that work on pure formal systems? Not at all. Instead, they came up with this really clever synthesis, a way to take that abstract, powerful toolkit of logic and use it to build models of specific real-world things. The solution today is actually pretty elegant. We basically have two sides of the coin. On one side, you've got pure logic. That's the abstract toolkit, all the symbols and rules. Then you have applied logic. And you can think of that as the workshop. It's where we take that toolkit, pick a specific slice of reality we care about, say biology or the economy, and actually build something useful. Okay, this leads to a concept with a admittedly complicated-sounding name, the gnoseological universum. But the idea is actually pretty straightforward. Let's say you're building a weather model. You decide that your universe is just the atmosphere. Your model builds a simplified version of reality that only includes things like temperature, pressure, and wind. It totally ignores things like, say, politics or the stock market. That specific, simplified world that your model lives in, that's its gnoseological universum. And this leads to a really profound takeaway. The piece of reality we're studying isn't just sitting there waiting for us. We actually shape our concept of it through the very tools we use to analyze it. That's what this phrase ontology is gnoseological really means. Our concept of what's real is built through the process of trying to know it. The observer and the observed are totally intertwined. Which leaves us with one last, big, provocative question to chew on. If every logical system we built, whether it's a scientific theory or a powerful AI, is creating its own little subjective reality, its own gnoseological universum, how do we make sure that little world actually lines up with the real one? In an age where complex models are making more and more decisions for us, that question isn't just philosophical anymore. It's absolutely critical.